Welcome to the Torah studies, Parshas Pekudei. It's the last parsha of the last portion of the book of Exodus, Shemais. We conclude this Shabbos Chazak. It's called the Strong Shabbos. The topic of discussion today: we don't always follow the rules. When it comes to teaching Judaism, we take an unconventional approach. So, when it comes to educate a child, raise a child in a Jewish way, teaching Judaism, the question that we need to ask ourselves is this something that we always do in a methodical way of teaching, step by step? Certain things a child, some say the child, I cannot burden the child with very difficult, complicated concepts. We'll take it step by step, slowly but surely. Or is there a reason? Is there need to give the child a different method of education in addition to the step-by-step education? And here, the Rebbe is going to teach us, based on a very interesting anecdote that happened in Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, that we read in this week's Torah portion, that he finally inaugurated the temple for the first time. We read in the Torah about the 7 days of initiation, Shiva Simei Miluim. What happened there in the desert after the giving of the Torah? God commanded them to build a temple, the tabernacle, a place, a home for God. They had the 7 days that they initiated, and then they had the 8th day was the inauguration of the temple and the Kohanim and so on. And the way things was done by Moses during these days, there's a number of things that we find that is different than it is normally done, and we'll soon explain what we're talking about. And there is reasons, and that's what the Rebbe is focusing on. So let's start. We're going to read the first text, and we'll go from there. Okay, that's the question. So here we see from Rashi when he talks about the days of initiation. It says Shekol Shiva Semei Miluim. During the 7 days of initiation, Moses erected the tabernacle, performed the services in it, and dismantled it each day. So what we see from here is two things. That is not the way it is normally done. Number one, the fact that Moses performed the services. Moses was not a Kohen. The ones to perform the services in the temple were the Kohanim. And here Moses was serving. And number two, we see the fact that he built the tabernacle, that temple in the desert, and these 7 days of initiation, every single day, he built it and he took it apart. He built it and dismantled it. Why would he do that? Then, those are the two things. He performed the services and erected and dismantled the Mishkan every day. Then there's another interesting thing. The Torah tells us the way Moshe Rabbeinu built on the 8th day, was something very strange took place. You see what he did? He built the Mishkan, he built the tabernacle, and then he had the altar. Now, the tabernacle, you have to understand, the tabernacle is the Mishkan itself, the temple, the little portable temple itself. Around the temple, there was a courtyard, and the courtyard was surrounded with a fence, was screened in. In the courtyard in front of the tabernacle, there was the altar where you would bring the offerings on the temple, on the altar. The altar was supposed to be in the courtyard of the temple, in the front yard. What Moses did in the first time, at least according to Rashi, he built the temple and then he built the altar and he brought the offerings before he enclosed the courtyard. That is something very strange. Why would you do such a thing? It's like you're building a house. You're gonna bring in the furniture before you close the wall. You're gonna set your bedroom and go to sleep in there before the walls are there. Why would he do the services before he puts the wall around the courtyard? That is the very strange things that need explanation, and that's what we are going to talk about. So here we read in the verses in the parsha, he placed the altar of the burnt offering in front of the entrance of the tabernacle, the tent of the meeting. That's called another name for the tabernacle, which is the temple. And he offered up the burnt offerings and the meal offering as God has commanded him. And then it says he set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar and put up the screen at the entrance to the courtyard. And with this, Moses completed the work. And the question is why? Why would you do such a thing? And this was not the way it was usually done. Now we have to understand this temple that they had in the desert. This was the portable temple. The Mishkan was a portable temple. They traveled in the desert for 40 years. They carried the temple with them from place to place. The way it was done, it was an unbelievable, sophisticated operation. The way the Jewish people camped was in a very organized fashion. Each tribe, the 12 tribes, were camped around the temple. And the way they traveled, how did they know when they have to travel? There was the cloud over the temple, and when the cloud stood up, they knew that this is time to travel, and they followed the cloud. The way they traveled, first the tribes camping in front, they started to travel. Then around the temple was the tribe of Levi, the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi were also divided into few families. And each family, there was the Gershon, Kahat, and Merari, the three families of the Levites. And each family had they were given certain tasks. Each family had designated what they should do. There were those who carried the beams. They took it apart. They carried the beams. They carried the curtains. And there were those who carried the holy objects, the ark, the table, the menorah. Those were the kahas. So the way they did it, so first the families that carried the tabernacle itself, the beams and the coverings and everything, they traveled first. And wherever the cloud stopped, that's what they knew. That's where they have to build again the tabernacle. So they build it up completely. And after, by the time the family of Kahat that came, and they were carrying those holy articles, the object, the furniture, so to speak, that need to go in there. By the time they arrived, the temple was already standing. Everything was ready, and they moved in there. Everything was ready. So you see that this was they did for 40 years in the desert. They always traveled like that. Everything was organized, and they made sure that everything would be built before they bring in the holy articles and before they start doing the services. So that's the question. Why did Moses do different? Why did he bring up the offerings on the first day of the inauguration? He brought the offerings before he completed the closing of the courtyard. So that is the question. So let's see what it says here. So this is what we read in the Torah, the way it was done, throughout the 40 years. The Gershon and Merari families in charge of erecting the tabernacle preceded the Kahat family, who carried the sacred furnishing. They would erect the tabernacle while the Kahat family traveled behind them. They would erect the tabernacle in advance, so that by the time the Kahat family arrived, they would find it complete. They would bring in the ark, the tabernacle, the candelabrum, the menorah, and the altars. Not only that, we know that when Moshe Rabbeinu instructed Bezalel. Bezalel was the one who built they created the furnishing, the holy objects. When he instructed him what to do, he told him to do he told him to do the vessels and then to build the temple. So Bezalel told him, he objected. He said, that's not the way you do things. You first build the house and then you bring in the furniture. So he's fine that Bezalel already told it to Moses, and Moses actually agreed to him. And he told him, this is actually, you know what? This is you. Your name is Betzalel. Betzalel means Betzel Kel, in the shadow of God, which means that you have a divine understanding in this. Okay, this is a little painting that describes somewhat the way it looked. Not exactly perfect, but more or less the way it looked, with the altar, with a courtyard, with surrounded by the Mishkan in the middle and the altar in the courtyard. So here we read what Rashi says. Bezalel objected, and he said to Moses, the common custom is to build the home first and then fill it with furnishing. So Moses replied, you were in the shadow of God. Surely that is what God said to me. Indeed, this is how he built it, the tabernacle first and then the furnishing. So why again, the question is again, why did Moses do differently? The question goes even further. If we learn the Jewish law regarding the offerings in the Holy Temple, there is a law that clearly indicates, it says we are not allowed to bring an offering outside of the courtyard, outside of the temple. It's called Shchutei Chutz. How would Moses bring the offering if there was no courtyard? If there was no courtyard, if he didn't put the fence yet, there was no courtyard, so it's outside of the temple. How would he do that? And indeed, for that reason, there are some commentators, the Nachmanides says, that the order in the Torah is not exactly the way it was. It was actually Moses first built the courtyard, he first put the fence around, and then he brought the offerings. That's what the Nachmanides says. Not everybody agrees with him. So the Nachmanides says, Moses offered up the burnt and meal offering at a later point. It is forbidden to offer up a sacrifice in an open yard that is not screened in. Doing so would have rendered the offering unfit, for it would have been slaughtered outside of the tabernacle, outside of the temple. We therefore conclude that he brought those offering at a later point. That's what the Nachmanides says. But Rashi does not agree with that. Rashi understood it literally, the way it's written in the Torah. That's the way it was. So the question really is a double question. Question is double question. Number one, why would he do that? Why would he do that? What sense does it make to make the offering before he built the temple, before he put around? And number two, how is he allowed to do it if it goes against the law that says you're not allowed to offer the sacrifice outside of the temple? So we're going to first answer question number one and question number two, and then we're going to come back to question number one. So when did this happen? When did it happen? It happened on the day of the inaugural day. When was the inaugural day? It was the first day of the month of Nisan. It was the 8th day of the initiation. It was 7 days initiations, and then there was on the 8th day, it was the first day of Nisan. That is when he was instructed to build the temple. This we read in the Exodus, in the Chumash. The Torah says, and God spoke to Moses, saying, erect the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, on the first day of the first month. The first month, of course, is the month of Nisan. So the Torah tells him to build the temple on the first day of Nisan. But he built the temple already 7 days earlier. He built the temple and he built it and he put it down. 7 days. So the Mishkan was inaugurated on the first day of Nisan. This day marked the Mishkan's 8th construction. He already built it for 8 days. This is already the 8th time that he built it. And indeed, that's what the Torah says. On the 8th day, it came to pass on the 8th day that Moses summoned Aaron, his sons, and the Jewish elder. Why is it called the 8th day? It was the first day of the month. Why is it called the 8th day? Because this was the 8th day of the initiation of the temple, meaning it was for 7 days they practiced, and the 8th day was the day of the inauguration. Because for 7 days they needed to do. So the question is, why did Moses have to take it apart, build it and take it apart? And the answer is simple. Hashem told Moses when is the day that he should build a temple. That is on the first day of Nisan. And then he tells him also that there are 7 days that you need to initiate the Kohens, to train them in, to serve in the temple. And it has to be done in front of the tent. It has to be done in front of the tent, as we'll soon read inside. So that is why Moses knew that he needs to build the temple and put it apart. Why? Because when does he have to build a temple? On the first day of Nisan. 7 days before, he needs to train them in. He needs to train them in front of the temple. So how do you do it? That's why you have to take it, build it, and take it apart. Build it and take it apart. And finally, on the 8th day, after the 7 days of initiation, this is when he built it to stay in a permanent way. This is what we see inside here. So Vayi bayem hashmini lemeluim, as Rashi says, and it came to pass on the 8th day of the initiation. This was the first day of the first month, the Nisan, the day that the tabernacle was erected. And here God instructs Moses that for 7 days he needs to train them in. As we read, this is what you must do to sanctify the priests to serve me. Bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of the meeting and bathe them in water. The sacred vestments that belong to Aaron should belong to his children after him, to be exalted by them and to invest them with authority. The priests that succeed him from among his sons, who will enter the tent of meeting to serve in the holy, must wear them for 7 days. And then, says the Torah, the priest that succeed him from among his sons, who will enter the tent of the meeting to serve in the holy, must wear them for 7 days. And finally it says, do for Aaron and his sons all that I have commanded you, initiate them for 7 days. So this is why Moshe Rabbeinu needed to do this. So the 7 days he initiated the Cohens. On the 8th day, it was the initiation of the temple. All right, so the Mishkan was not erected during these 7 days for the purpose of initiation of the Mishkan. It was erected to provide a setting for the initiation of the Kohanim. So that's what happened in the first 7 days. It was built, but it was not to initiate the Mishkan. It was to initiate the Kohanim. They needed a place to practice. And that's why he took it down every day. And the Mishkan was initiated on the 8th day. Now, on this day, the Mishkan was permanently erected to serve as God's home. However, the 8th day was still a part of the initiation process. So the Kohanim, for them, it was already the inauguration, was the first day that they actually came and served in the Holy Temple. But the temple, then it was the initiation of the temple itself. The 7 days was the initiation of the Kohens to train them in. The 8th day was the initiation of the temple itself. Now this explains, as Rashi says here, Moses also led the service and brought the communal offering on the 8th day of the initiation phase, the day the tabernacle was erected, even though Moses wasn't the Kohen. Why? Because this was still part of the initiation of the temple. That is why Moses did this on the 8th day, which was the first day of the inauguration. Now this explains why the regular laws that apply to whatever has to be done in the temple didn't apply on that day, because this was different. This was the day of the initiation. Moses wasn't a Kohen and he served there. And for that reason, that law that says that you cannot offer offerings outside also did not apply on that day. So that explains to us the why. The why Moses was able to do it. Why? It was not against the law. Okay, so in addition to the Kohanim, Moses also brought some offerings on the 8th day. This proves that this day was still part of the initiation phase for the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Okay, so the unusual occurrences during the 7 days of initiation is 1, Moses performed the services, 2, Moses erected and dismantled the Mishkan each day, and 3, offering were brought out in the open. As the Rebbe brings it, the Rebbe says this and explains this. He says the 8th day of initiation was part of the preparatory educational phase for the tabernacle service and the commandment to make me a sanctuary. It was not problematic for the service to begin immediately upon the altar's erection before the screening of the yard, because the rules for an educational service are different. It's not the same rules that applies to the regular services and once the temple was already set. So that explains the why it was okay, why it wasn't against the law. However, the first question still remains. What's the reason? What's the logic? Why would he do that? Why wouldn't he build the temple and put everything in order and then bring the offerings? And this is where the Rebbe goes, and it takes it to the next level. And he explains that this is a way that Moshe is teaching us the chinuch, the education. The bringing up, the inauguration of the temple is also called the chinuch, which is the same word of education. That when you come to educate a child, when you come to educate a Jew, sometimes you don't do things in the regular order. You need to have also something which is extraordinary. And we'll explain this by reading to you a story that happened in the time of the Alter Rebbe. In the time of the Alter Rebbe, there was the Enlightenment movement that started in Germany. They tried to get the Jews to adapt the cultures, the Enlightenment, and to let go of the old-fashioned traditions and everything. And they had their missionary work. They came into Ukraine, to Russia, to Poland, to all these countries around, and they did a lot of damage, getting children away, young people away from the traditional Judaism. And they tried to get. They came to Vilna, also they were successful in different communities. And then they decided to send someone also to the Hasidic community in Liadi, where the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was. And they sent a person by the name Shimon, and he said he was Shimon from Zamut. Now this Shimon was a very learned person. And the way he would do it, he came as a pious Jew, dressed like a regular Orthodox Jew. And he was very learned, and he was also very knowledgeable in Dikduk, in the linguistic, in the Hebrew. He was a linguist in Hebrew, and he knew that the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, he was very careful with reading carefully the Dikduk, the proper, and the Alter Rebbe actually wrote the Siddur. He put the Siddur together, collecting from many different versions and putting together the Chabad Siddur. Alter Rebbe did it himself. So he knew that this is something that Alter Rebbe very strong into it. And he decided to take this approach and to come to offer his services as a teacher for little children and educate them to proper Hebrew and so on. And he came to meet the Alter Rebbe. Now, we're going to read that story, but before, I want to give you some context to understand the story. The context goes with the story of Yaakov and Esav, the story with Yitzchak and the blessings. Remember that story? So we have Yitzchak in his old age wants to bless his son. He summoned Esav. He says, please prepare me a meal, and I want to bless you before I die. Yaakov knew that Rivka wanted that Yaakov should get the blessings, and she got Yaakov to go and dress himself up as Esav and to come into his father's and to get the blessings, because really he deserved the blessings because he was legally, according to Torah, he had the first birthright because Esav sold it to him. So he got there, and he got the blessings. And after he left, Esav walks in. And Esav walks in, says, the Torah says, Esav walks in and says, Father, get up. I brought you the food so you can bless me. So the Torah says, Vayecherad Yitzchak charada gedola ad moed. Yitzchak got very frightened. And he said to him, who was the one who brought me the food that and I ate and I gave him the blessing? May he be blessed. So the question is, what does it mean he's got frightened? What's Vayecherad? The word Vayecherad means like that it was shuddered. So Rashi brings two interpretations to what that means. Simple interpretations, Rashi says, that he was just perplexed. What's going on? Yaakov came, now you come. I mean, I thought it was Esau first, and now you come. What's going on? Then Rashi brings a second interpretation. He said that when Esau walked into the room, he says he saw the opening of the purgatory opened up in front of him. That's why he was frightened. What's going on? This is the background of the story, and now we can appreciate the story, what we're going to read. So here's the verse in the Torah that says, Vayecherad Yitzchak charada gedola ad ma'od, and Isaac shuddered a great shudder. And he said, who then is the one that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate of everything before you arrived? And I blessed him. He too shall be blessed. Okay? Says Rashi. Vayecherad, says Rashi, and Isaac shuddered. As rendered in the Targum, the translation of Unconventional says, Vetava, meaning he was perplexed. He was just didn't understand what's going on. Who is who? And then Rashi says, and the Midrashic explanation is that he saw purgatory open beneath him. And now to the story. Now this is the story the way the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote it down. And this is a recording of that impostor, Shimon. We call him Shimon HaKofer. He called himself Shimon from Zamut, the one who tried to bring the enlightenment and to try to take away the Jewish children from the tradition. This is the way it's brought down there. Okay, so here on Wednesday, this writes Shimon, the Shimon from Zamut writes it. On Wednesday, my turn arrived to be received by the Rebbe. This was the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, for a private audience in the chamber that the Hasidim call the supernal Gan Eden. By the way, this is what we call even today in 770 the place, the Rebbe's room, we call Gan Eden Elyon. And the corridor before the Rebbe's room, we call the Gan Eden Tacht, and the lower Gan Eden. When I entered the Rebbe's chamber, I was struck with fear and awe by the appearance of his face. He writes honestly what he felt. His powerful and penetrating glance and his mighty and deliberate voice inquired, "What can I do for you?" But I immediately recovered and calmed myself. I said, "I am an elementary school teacher in my hometown, and I teach my pupils according to the rules of Hebrew grammar." The Rebbe leaned on his forehead. Then he raised his head, opened his eyes, and asked me how I explained the passage. And Isaac was seized with very great trembling to my students. That's the verse that we just read. So I explained it according to the first interpretation of Rashi, that it means that he was perplexed, I replied. And why don't you explain it according to the second interpretation of Rashi, quoting the Medrash that he saw purgatory open up beneath him? He asked, Alter Rebbe asked him. In my opinion, I replied, says Shimon, one shouldn't fill the pupils' delicate minds with Agada in general. Agada is the part of the Talmud that talks about stories. We have every Shabbos, Chani gives a class in Ein Yaakov. The Agada, the stories of the Talmud, that some of them really go beyond, it seems like they make no sense. They're so talking about miracles, things that they seem like exaggerations. So that's what he told him. He believes that he shouldn't be with Agada in general, and especially with subjects such as purgatory that might frighten them. We must especially abstain from teaching young children things that they can't even imagine. The pupil will wonder how the large and wide opening of purgatory could fit into Isaac's small room. And how could its fire, which have been blazing uninterrupted for 5,555 years, enter the room? And yet Esau and his father Isaac survived and were not burned to a crisp. That's what he said. That's what Shimon says to the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe says to Shimon, and how does the Medrash know that he saw purgatory open up beneath him? He asked further. I remained silent, making no reply. Obviously, I had no answer. Indeed, this would not be the first gross exaggeration found in the Medrash and the Talmud. When he saw that I remained silent, the Rebbe said, when Esau entered Isaac's room, Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" To this, Esau replied, "I am Esau, your firstborn son." But this was a lie, for he had already sold the birthright to Jacob in a legal sale with all the required formalities. Isaac knew this, and he was very frightened by the lie that attempted to annul a reality that was valid by the Torah law. This caused him to tremble, for telling such a lie resulted in purgatory open beneath him. That's what the Alter Rebbe explains to Shimon. And then he goes on. When the Rebbe finished speaking, he leaned on his forehead as he had done before. Then he raised his head and opened his eyes. It is customary that whenever he received people, even during the daytime, there are two lit candles, a Chumash and a Zohar, on the table. He now lifted one of the candles, scrutinized me, and said, "You come here from Vilna, but you claim to come from Zamut. You convert little children to the idolatry of Haskalah, the enlightenment. But you claim to be a Melamed, a teacher of children. Because of these lies," the Alter Rebbe continued, "purgatory opens beneath you. How many souls have you already destroyed? Yet you continue to betray. Yes, it's true, you are a heretic, and anyone who goes down that road will never return." I quickly fled his chamber. That's the way he records his own story, honestly. And obviously the Alter Rebbe was able to see things. He was able to see, he couldn't fool the Alter Rebbe. The question though is, understand obviously what he did, and his mission was to get children away from tradition. But what about the argument itself about how to educate the children? Why isn't this a valid argument to say that children, maybe you shouldn't scare them with purgatory, things that seem so frightened, things that seem so beyond logic? Why don't you try to teach the children simple things, plain things, what they can understand, what they can grasp? And the answer is that when it comes to education, there are two objectives. There's an objective in education, progressive education, step by step, things, how to get the children used to in a gradual way. But then there is also the necessity of shock treatment. What does that mean? First of all, we have this rules, step by step, how to educate children. Here's from Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, Biurim B'divrei Razal. He lived in 1885, from 1885 to 1966. So he writes as follows. The first principle of practical pedagogy is established a regular order. To establish a regular order, every form of pedagogy, I hope I pronounce it correctly. Pedagogy. It seeks to impart knowledge the pupils do not possess and to develop certain character traits. How is this achieved? Primarily through repetition and habituation. Get them used to it. Get them into the habit of doing things. Through daily and hourly measured repetition. By progressing in a balanced, deliberate, and progressive way in all times and places. And by using consistency and precision. That's the normal order. But then there is something else. Then there is a need. When it comes to Jewish education, there is the need to give the child some solid education, solid things that goes beyond logic. You know, when we received the Torah, the Jewish people were told they said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. We learned today in Tanya about the learning of the Torah. When you learn the Torah, you bring God's presence into this world. And we spoke about the fact that the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were completely nullified into godliness. They were like a chariot to God, because God was shining through them. They felt godliness in every fiber of their being. However, the Jewish people, an ordinary person, an ordinary Jew, is not qualified, is not capable of doing this, of holding God's such a powerful energy. We're not vessels for it. Nevertheless, we did experience this once. When was it? At the giving of the Torah. By the giving of the Torah, God, the first two commandments, God spoke directly to the Jewish people that were there, including all of the neshamas, all of the souls of the future generations, including all of the souls of the future converts. Every single soul was there and experienced the godly revelation. This was like a shock treatment. What happened then? Sages tell us the Jewish people died twice, and God revived them twice. It was the shock treatment. It was the treatment that gave them the feeling and understanding there is something beyond logic, is something godly. And although they cannot contain it and they cannot sustain this kind of energy, they nevertheless need to have that. In the process of educating a Jewish child, the child also needs that kind of treatment. Obviously not in the way we received it then. We have it subconsciously until this day, every one of us, subconsciously. But in essence, this is what we need to educate the child. If you want the building of our own temple, having God in our presence, to be a permanent thing, when the child is young and impressionable, you need to give them not just the progressive teaching, the logical teaching, the this and the that, step by step. You need to give them right away the ultimate truth. From time to time, you tell them stories about crazy stories of tzaddikim performing miracles that makes no sense whatsoever. You tell it to them, because you're telling them the truth. You talk to them about what Yitzchak saw, the purgatory open up, even though it may be scary, maybe look something totally doesn't make sense, but this is the truth. This is a truth that is beyond our logic. And this is a truth that children need to know. When a child is raised like that, the life decision is not going to be, okay, if it makes sense to me, I'm going to do it. If it doesn't make sense to me, then maybe I shouldn't do it. If he's raised with the knowledge, if he's raised with an education, with a message that is given, that there is a truth, the shock treatment, the treatment that you know from childhood that there is the ultimate truth. This will make sure that the education that he gets becomes permanent, and even when he's outside of the temple, when the walls of the comfort of the holiness is gone, he goes out there in the world, that truth will stay with him. And he will be ready to give up conveniences for the purpose of doing the truth. This, says the Rebbe, is the inner explanation why Moses chose on the day of the inauguration of the temple to build the altar and to bring the offering right there outside of the walls. because this is a truth that needs to be permeated, and to know that this is, no matter if we have a temple, we have the walls, we don't have the walls, that truth is always there. The temple that you're doing in your heart, the building of the altar, is always there regardless of what the circumstances, regardless of where you may end up one day. This is the way of educating a child. Let's see what the Rebbe says inside. Says the Rebbe, although it is important that every Jewish child be taught according to their path, we mustn't be content with the limited pedagogy that is common around the world, though this too is consistent with the Torah approach. Yes, the Torah says, teach them gradually. It is true. But at the same time, rather, our education must also include sacred, transcendental content, even if it is beyond the child's current understanding. We must even teach the concept of self-sacrifice on occasion. Self-sacrifice doesn't necessarily mean physically, literally. Self-sacrifice, sacrifice what you care for. And of course, people even gave up their lives. That's already within a neshama shines. Teaching Jewish children ideas that are beyond their understanding nurtures a commitment to Torah that transcends their understanding. Continues the Rebbe, this pedagogical approach produces the desired result that even when they grow old, they do not turn from your teaching. It is inspired pupils. It inspires pupils to a firm, durable, permanent commitment to Judaism, even when they step out of the home and the environment of the holiness. They remain strong and firm in the Judaism. And that answers why Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, performed the services in an open yard to show that our connection with God isn't confined to sacred space. Sacred spaces like the Mishkan or our homes, it endures even when the walls are down and we are exposed to the world's influence. And the Rebbe continues and says, we offer sacrifices. Sacrifices is not only the literal sacrifices, it is also sometimes of bodily pleasures and animal soul, of the animal soul. Even if we are not in a home that is illuminated permanently. And obviously with God's holiness, such as houses of prayer or study. We also eat sacrificial meat. This represents the idea that our firm commitment to Judaism becomes our food and nourishment. We remain committed even if we are in an environment that is spiritually arid and is not surrounded by the walls and boundaries of holiness. So this is what it is. You know, one of the slogan of the back then in the Enlightenment movement, they said, "Be Adam b'tzeitecha veYehudi be'ohalecha." Be a man when you go out and a Jew when you're at home. The Rebbe says the opposite is true. We got to keep our Yiddishkeit inside, in the home or out the home. So many, and this is a beautiful article that Rabbi Loshak, who is part of this JLI, prepares this. He wrote this article. It says many parents take a common practice approach with the children. I don't want to overwhelm them with anything over the top, too intense. So I'll leave it to them to discover religion slowly, without pressure. And so they are shielded from anything their parents deemed too extreme or fanatic. Teach them some Hebrew, a little about Israel, and rituals around the holidays. That's nice. Who doesn't like apples and honey and afikoman treats? That's great. But asking them to pray at age 10, to not watch television and the whole Shabbat every week, to really not eat non-kosher candy, relax. Let's take it easy. They are just kids. Let's not scare them off with too much too soon. You are forgiven for thinking so, but Moses teaches us that sometimes you must buck the common practice and leapfrog a couple steps. Pile it on early without worry. On the contrary, doing so will ensure that even when the walls of whatever holiness they have come down, they'll still be strong with the values and passion you imbued within them before the walls went up. And as it is with children, so it is with us. Who wants to go crazy and bite off more than they can chew? You think to yourself, I've got to take this slowly and methodically. This is a process, and I shouldn't take on too much too soon. You're right and you're wrong. You're right on an average day, but not every day is average. Sometimes you must get on the express train. Don't wait until you'll build the entire building of Jewish infrastructure before signing on for that all-night Shavuot learn-a-thon, getting your own pair of tefillin, or committing to a monthly mikveh visit. Taking the cue from Moses, who offered a sacrifice even before the walls went up, you too can take the plunge right now. You're not ready. That's okay. The Jews in the desert weren't either. Moses did what he did anyway, and it worked. Be like Moses. It'll work for you too. What a beautiful article. And that is so true. And that's the lesson we take from here. Sometimes, especially the Rebbe says, especially now, as we are in the time so close to Mashiach, we need that kind of shock treatment, that kind of taking the leap. We need it much more than ever before. And B'ezrat Hashem, that will lead us to the ultimate leap of the entire world will leap towards the Geula, towards the redemption. It should be very soon. Amen. Yes, Hanai.
I've always been meaning to ask this question. It's a very unique question. Some people may view it as a loaded question, but it's not. It's just, I mean, how do you explain, like, for instance, you're saying we're closer and closer, not you saying it's the sentiment now that we're closer and closer to Mashiach. What about the Holocaust? What about the 1800? What about the pogroms that happen every 100 years? I'm sure in every attic, little corner of the world back then in the Middle Ages and prior to that, everybody was always waiting for Mashiach. So what different is it now from then? Why did Mashiach come then? Why is he going to come now?
Number one, we have to keep asking that question. And the more people will ask that question, that will have the coming of Mashiach. And number two, the fact that we are still here despite of all these tragedies, and despite that logically it does make sense that we should survive, that we should thrive like that. That itself shows you that Am Yisrael is Am Yisrael Chai, Am HaNetzach, the eternal nation. And as the Rebbe said, it could be one more deed, one more act that we will do. That could be that would be the straw that break the camel's back, that tips the scale to the good, and will bring Mashiach, as the Maimonides says it. The Rebbe repeated it many, many times.
Who came up with the saying that, with the explanation that when Jews observe 2 Sabbaths in a row all around the world?
That's from the Talmud, the different explanations what that means. But anyway, this is, we try everything what we can. But ultimately we follow, the Rebbe gave us the direct instructions what we should do. We should. The Rebbe told us about learning about Mashiach, about the coming of Mashiach. What we should study the Torah of this.
I agree with you
Prepare
in
ourselves.
every aspect.